Welcome, and happy new year to the first kickoff stream of 2026 from Tux here. It's me, your boy, Chris Demars, resident senior developer advocate at TuxCare. Hopefully, you're staying hydrated. I got my Bella V, not sponsored. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are at in the world. If you are tuned in to the stream, I hope you had an amazing Christmas, an amazing holiday, an amazing 2 week break. I think we're all still trying to get back into the swing of things in the new year. I know I am, but I just wanted to say Happy New Year. Thank you for tuning in. And I want to bring up onto the stage my buddy, Dan Moore. What's going on, Dan?
Hello. Thanks for having me and happy new year to everyone as well. I can't believe it's 2026. I really can't.
It felt like 2025 just flew by, man.
Totally.
Like it was super fast.
And slow at the same time, right? Like it was one of those
Yeah.
weird years. And I don't know, maybe I'm not gonna say anything about your age, Chris, but like as I approach middle age, it feels like the years just kind of fly by faster and faster. So maybe that's some aspect of it too. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, they do say though that time flies when you're having fun. So I mean, maybe we're doing something right.
totally, totally.
Cool. No, I'm glad we could get together. I know we had a little bit of an issue last month, but that's totally okay. Time zones are hard and time is hard and it's December. So I mean, things just happen.
Yeah,
So we
appreciate
kind of
that.
got back on track. So
Yeah.
so before we get started, if you're not following me on Twitter, make sure that you give me a follow. Uh, Twitter.com/Salt and Burnham. You can also follow me on Blue Sky at christamars.net. If you are not following TuxCare on Twitter, give TuxCare a follow. Twitter.com/TuxCare. Follow us on all the socials, YouTube, Facebook, whatever your choice is. And then you can also give Fusion off a little follow on Blue Sky and LinkedIn, and you can hit up Dan as well. And then, with that being said, Dan, give us a little introduction. Tell us who you are, what you do, what you're all about.
Sure. So, I am an employee of Fusion Auth. I'm the senior director of SIAM strategy and identity standards there, which is kind of a mouthful, but the basic idea is um, I am looking out at the SIAM landscape, which SIAM stands for Customer Identity and Access Management, basically login systems and authentication systems and authorization systems. I'm looking out that bigger environment, both in terms of the competitive landscape and the standards landscape, and trying to interact with that and support both of those areas. And then also taking some information back into our company to help inform our product roadmap and product direction. So it's a relatively new role for me. Before I've kind of done some DevRel and some other kind of more product engineering work, but I'm excited about this. And it is really fun to be able to interact with the larger ecosystem and kind of see what's going on and what people are excited about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Fusion Auth, it's a great company. I've known you at Fusion Auth for a long time. I'm friends with Kim. Kim's a Michigander, so Kim and I have known each other for a very long time. And so, Fusion Auth, what is Fusion Auth all about? What do you guys do?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're in the customer identity and access management space. So basically, the idea is that we provide a service, a piece of software that you can either run in your own systems, in your own Kubernetes cluster, in your own cloud, or we can run it for you that you snap into your application and it provides all the authentication related things. So login, forgot password, pass keys, registration, SAML, OIDC, all the things that your application needs, but aren't core to the features and the value of your application. So that's basically the problem that we solve for developers.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've always liked Fusion Auth as an org, and I've gone through the docs and I've set up certain things, especially when I was interviewing with you guys last year, and it was seamless. Like getting set up was seamless. I think you guys have an amazing docs, a great product, and I'm stoked to be talking about all those things today.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, and appreciate the time you've taken to kick the tires. Developer attention is so so precious. So appreciate that time.
Yeah, for sure. And we know that, just being developer advocates and being in the DevRel space and you being prior in the DevRel space, that, the DX and developer retention and hello world from 0 to 60 is, it's one of those important things.
Totally.
So what are we talking about? I think we're talking about authorization models. You're gonna school me on all of the cool different types of authorization models and when to use them and the differences between them, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, eh, I think that it's worth taking a step back a little bit, and this is something that you and I deal with all the time, right? When we are like super in deep in a space, it's easy for us to assume things. People that we talk to know things that we know, and
Right.
sometimes I like to take a step back and talk about like the basics. And it's kind of worth saying that like authentication is who you are in an online system. So I like to think of it as like a D card. Um, Authorization is what you can do, and the canonical kind of real world example of that is a car key, right? A car key doesn't care who you are, it cares that you possess it, and then you can get access to the car, drive the car off. um, Within the online systems that we're all building, there's some gradations with authorization, and obviously it's tied almost all the time to authentication. So that's why fusion auth is interested in it, and we recently purchased a acquired a company that was in the authorization space, which is why it's more front and center for us than it might have been in the past. But so that's kind of the source of the interest. But let's talk about authorization models. And these are things that you as a developer need to think about when you are building your application. And in the same way that authentication cross cuts most applications, right? Almost every application requires you to log in. Authorization is the same. Almost every application has some things that some people can do and other things that they can't do, right? Like levels of access. So I think there's three main authorization models that are worth talking about. The first is called RBAC, which stands for role-based access control. And this has been around for decades. And the idea is, Chris gets to be an admin in the application and Dan is a viewer. And so Chris gets to do all these actions in the application, configure new connections or whatever the application lets you do. He gets to interact with it at admin level, whereas Dan has a much smaller subset of actions that he can take. So role-based access control is pretty foundational and pretty common. The next step up, or how do I put this? The next kind of step up in complexity is what I call ABAC. And so ABAC is called attribute based access control. And so this is where you don't just have static roles, but you actually have um, attributes that can be either of the user or of the resource that can affect things. So, an example of that might be if I have a bank, right? There's a banking application, and there may be actions that I can take as a member of the bank, and there may be actions that an employee could take, but it may be limited by the time the bank is open, right? So each bank could have a different kind of set of open and close times. And so the authorization system doesn't need to just consider, does Dan have access to the bank? Is he a member of the bank? But it's like, is the bank open or not? And that's a very simple example, but you could imagine that you could have multiple different kinds of attributes and different kinds of rules that could build into kind of a complicated logic system. The last authorization model is called relationship based access control, or REBAC. And it's capital R, lowercase e, and then capital BAC to distinguish it from RBAC. And relationship based access control is the canonical example of that is Google Drive, where I can grant you, Chris, access to a single file, a folder, or a folder of folders, and that access is how do I put this? That access is rolled up. So if I give you access to a top level folder, then I don't have to give you access to each of the objects within that file folder system. So, and then we can talk more about those models. We can also talk about like when it makes sense to externalize your authorization, or we can dig into deeper in examples, wherever you want
Yeah,
to take
no.
this.
No, that's awesome. I think the only one I've ever really heard of is RBAC, right? But it's cool that you kind of put and I like how you kind of put examples to everything. I'd like to go more into the examples and maybe like demos of what they are. But I didn't know like reback was a thing, and that like Google Drive is a perfect example of that. Because I constantly like we have like a work Google Drive, I have my own personal Google Drive, but like your drive in your work Google Drive, it's always like secure to you, right? So I'm always having to like give access out. I didn't know that's what that was specifically. So I can just go back to work and be like, hey, I'm using Reback today because I had to give you access to this file in a folder, but I don't want you to have everything in my drive.
Totally.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, I think that, and I don't actually know when ABAC and REBAC were kind of more fully fleshed out, but they definitely are newer authorization models. And I think it's worth actually kind of talking to your audience and saying, like, hey, these are very powerful things. They are complicated, right? Like they're complicated to implement and they're complicated to get right. And obviously, the stakes are high because the last thing you want is for someone to um, get access to a Google Drive folder that they should
Right.
have access to. But so you shouldn't reach for these kind of powerful tools until your application needs them, right? Like many applications that are very successful, WordPress is one of them, but there's a lot of other ones are perfectly fine with RBAC, right? Just like give people roles, have those roles be relatively static, and then have the actions based on that someone can see both UX and back end actions based on the roles.
Gotcha. Would single sign-on be like an example of RBAC, or is that like a totally different authorization model?
Yeah, I think that single sign-on is more of like kind of moves up the stack to authentication, where you basically are letting people log in once and get access to multiple applications. I would expect each of those applications to have an authorization model that stands behind it. And, if I'm single signing on to like Google Calendar and Google Drive, Google Calendar may be more of an RBAC model. I don't know. I'm just kind of speculating here. And Google Drive, as we mentioned, is a reback model. So what all these author, and I think this is actually a pretty important point that I'm glad you called out. Like all these authorization models, almost all of them have like the concept of like a subject, which is the thing that which is like essentially the person or the program that's doing the thing, and then a resource. So single sign-on helps you get that subject, gets the person or piece of software that actually can do or is trying to access the resource.
Mhm. No, that's really good. What about LDAP? Like, I haven't heard the term LDAP in years, but does LDAP also kind of fall into these models as well?
Yeah, I would say LDAP is again further up stack, kind of more an authentication piece. You'd be surprised. We actually still have people that are Fusion Auth integrates with LDAP, and we still have people that come to us because the LDAP is embedded in systems,
Wow.
and especially more in the business side of things. I
Yeah,
think there aren't too many consumer applications that are built on LDAP, but um, within LDAP, you do have the capability of having groups and things like that, which map pretty seamlessly to the RBAC authorization model.
cool. So I was going through the docs that you sent over to me and just kind of running through and trying to get kind of up to speed. And I saw that there's a PBAC, a policy authorization model. Can you explain that one a little bit?
Yeah, so PBAC is it kind of I don't, is a little bit like overlaps with ABAC and RBAC and REBAC because the idea with PBAC is that you have a centralized policy that has sets of rules that control access. And so this has tremendous benefits because, well, it's got tremendous benefits, but also trade-offs because you have a centralized place to see your authorization, to be able to test authorization, to be able to version control it, to be able to audit it, to be able to control who has access to it. But many PBAC systems can support ABAC, RBAC, or REBAC. And so the idea is that is the policy language complicated enough or support rich enough that it can support those different authorization models?
Cool.
Um,
That's awesome.
but I do think that's actually something I did want to bring up is that there is the concept of like how do I put this? you authorization, hopefully your listeners all kind of are getting the fact that authorization is kind of this complicated, super business logic specific piece of your application. And the options are that I see commonly are you can build it into your application, just have it in code. You can extract it out to a library that's embedded in your application. A tool like Caspin is an open source library that lets you do that. Or you can extract out to a third party authorization server like Permify, which is the one that we acquired, or there's others out there, Servos, Permit, um, some of the OPA stuff. Um, and you have different trade-offs for each of those options, right? Like if it's in code, it is deployable with your application. It is right next to the actions it takes, but you can end up with like repeated logic, and you can end up with like escalation of permission issues. If you use a library or a centralized service, then it gets abstracted out. You might have a little more complicated implementation, but you have like this central place where it lives. And if it is an external service outside of your application, then you can share that authorization logic between different applications. And again, what is the right answer? It really depends on your scenario, right? If you're trying a startup trying to get stuff off the ground, you probably don't need, unless authorization complexity is a selling point or something that you're going to need to solve very soon for your problem space, you probably don't need a centralized server. Whereas if you're a larger, enterprise where you really want and need that auditability or that, lack of repeated logic that like might get changed little bits in places over time, then you want to move towards a centralized solution.
So you see more centralized solutions in more of like an enterprise type environment over a startup. Like, hey, we need to get this done quick. We don't need like a huge authorization model or policy because we don't have 10, 20,000 users or people or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have talked to a couple startups where the authorization piece was a differentiator for them, right? In terms of like there was one startup I talked to. I don't want to reveal who they are or anything like
Yeah.
that, but like they had it was kind of like 4 or 5 levels of types of people that they were trying to kind of model the behavior of, and it varied between different organizations and different customers. And so for them, a more complicated authorization model made sense to kind of build in from the beginning. But I've also been part of startups that were like just fine with RBAC or just fine
Mhm.
with just coded stuff like hard coded authorization logic because they were trying to get to product market fit, um, and just try to show the value. I think that like enterprises have this other kind of criteria in terms of, um, I hate to kind of mention auditability again, but like being able to know who can do what and be able to prove that out is much more valuable for a larger organization than it is for a smaller organization. So that's why I think they tend to lean towards, okay, let's centralize things and have more of a process, and have that be part of their application.
Do you see that it's more of like a trend with just with RBAC, or is it kind of over time it's implementing more of these policies as the org builds up? Because I mean, if I was gonna start a startup or just like a something small, I don't think I would want to take the time. I mean, I just don't know what the time and effort would look like. But if I had the option to choose, I would probably go just the easiest route, which in my it sounds like RBAC is the easiest way. Get up off the ground, get your auth model in place, and then build off of that if you need to.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And I can tell you have been around a while because um, I think that once you've developed a couple of things, you don't want to over engineer it. So, yes, I totally agree that like what you should do is, and again, this is generic advice, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think you should always start with the simplest possible thing. And that is in the authorization models that we've talked about, that is RBAC, right? So, and RBAC should be um table stakes. I know FusionAuth has it. I know a lot of the other authentication providers out there have this. A lot of frameworks have this kind of out of the box. And so use that until it breaks or until you can see it breaking. Unless again, there's always that situation of like, okay, yeah, I think this kind of echoes the discussion I've had with authentication before, right? Like, um, if you should always kind of offer the lowest common denominator, and you should um, never roll your own unless it's a competitive differentiator. And the honest truth is, I don't see too many places out there where authentication is a competitive differentiator for people. Authorization feels like it's a newer thing to be more standardized, and that is therefore it is more of a competitive differentiator for some people. But yeah, if you have an application that doesn't have complex like that startup that I mentioned that had like the 5 different levels of people, um, start with RBAC, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, like, if it was me just building something with, like, a login, and I'm the only admin that is running the whole org, and I just have members, like, RBAC would be the easiest. Well, I wouldn't like to use the term easiest, but the less painful solution, right? Painful? The painless solution would be just using RBAC
Yep.
just to get it up and running.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that it points to kind of like a bigger principle of software development, which again, you and I are in violent agreement on, which is like you do the simplest thing that could possibly work, especially kind of when you're starting from ground zero. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aware of these more complicated authorization models, right? I think that's one of the things that I was happy to come on the stream and talk about, because even just knowing that reback is a thing, or ABAC is a thing, or the PBAC is a thing, lets developers say in the back of their mind that, I can't count the number of times where I have read about something and then in months, years found, oh, this is the time to actually apply that thing, or the time to at least bring it in and have that discussion in a way that I wouldn't have before. So I want people to be aware of reback and ABAC and PBAC, so that when they have a need for that, they can, reach for it and do the research.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. One question I do want to ask you, and I talk about this in my conference talks all the time, and I talk about the three things that are always put on the back burner until shit hits the fan: accessibility, performance, and security. And now that working at TuxCare, I talk a lot about cybersecurity and CVEs and patching. I personally would lump authorization authentication in the security space, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you are trying to secure your systems against, you know, uh, not just malicious people that could gain access, but bad actors within that kind of whole system at the end of the day. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really interesting characterization, because the honest truth is that people are always worried about like the hackers coming in to
Exactly.
like,
It's hackers and CVEs and patching and like
but
there's
like
other aspects of
totally,
security. Yeah.
totally. And how many times have you been an employee at a company and you gain access to a system that you need once, and then later, like, you don't need access to it anymore, but like you still have that access. Like there's all kinds of internal risks that are very real that you want to address, and having picking the right authorization model and then enforcing it is a key part of that for sure. Because I think people, I'm not going to say that like external forces aren't something you should be concerned about, right? Like that's one of the things TuxCare provides, and
Yeah.
it's super important. But like you also want to make sure that you're not putting all your effort into the wall around your fortress. That you have the things inside your fortress. You have locks on your doors inside the fortress too.
Yep. No, that's a great point that you bring up because I mean I've heard stories of like people that have been laid off from their organizations, whatever, but they've had access to like systems outside of their org, like social media systems. Like if they did promotional stuff on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, that months later they still have access to those accounts. Like that's not good because if it wasn't a clean split, like there are a lot of people that are a lot there could be a lot of pissed off people out there from losing their gig. And if they still have access to your company's LinkedIn or your company's Twitter account, like that could be a recipe for
Yeah, I mean, I believe that most people are not going to take advantage of that kind of thing, right? Like
True.
most people
True.
will be like, "Hey, I still have access to this. You should take that away from me." And I've
Right.
definitely had
Yeah.
people who've done that, but like you can't trust everybody. And
Right.
if someone's in a bad state of mind or is frustrated, they may do things they later would regret, and your company would certainly regret them too. So
Right.
it makes way more sense to kind of cut that off and you know just have the systems to like enforce that as opposed to relying on the integrity and goodwill of people.
Yeah. So let's talk about so RBAC. I think that'd be a good one we could like kind of do a little dive into. If someone wanted to get started with RBAC and kind of getting it set up, I don't know if you have a demo or a walkthrough or anything, but what would be like the first steps for someone that is brand new to this? They see it as a great, means for their authorization model. What would that person do?
Sure. So I can do a couple things. I can show you kind of how roles work inside Fusion Auth if we want. Although I know this is not a Fusion Auth commercial, so I just want to like that would be as an example.
For sure.
I can also talk about how I think about modeling that, which is going to be more me talking than actually showing something. Which would you prefer?
Either or is fine. I like both. We got a little bit of time.
Okay, great. Let me pull up Fusion Auth real quick.
Cool.
I'm just logging in. All right, and sharing screen. Oh boy. I am not sure I can share my screen. Let me try this. You can tell we did this. We didn't practice this. Share screen. All
Let me
right.
know.
So this is kind of the Fusion Auth Admin UI, which is a layer over our APIs, and you have applications, and basically you can create roles inside an application. And let's add a role of what role do we have? Let's add an intern role. Intern submit, and then when we have users, we can basically we assign them to an application, and then they can get a role, and you can see this person has a role now. And now whenever they log in, they get a token, an access token, and that access token contains those roles. And
Awesome.
so this is the Fusion Auth side of things. There's obviously an application side of things too, which is going to look at that access token or that ID token, depending on the situation, and say, okay, Jared has the partner role. That means he gets access to the partners tab and can view partners and edit partners. And he also has the programmer tab, so he gets or the programmer role, so he gets access to the programmer functionality. Whereas somebody else might have a CEO role and get to see different things. So this is how you do it from kind of an authentication server perspective, or at least the Fusion Auth one. And I know that Keycloak and other authentication servers have similar kind of constructs. It may depend. Sometimes I think with Auth0 you assign roles at the tenant level instead of at the application level, but that's a little bit of it's going to vary piece by piece. But the biggest takeaway for your audience is you assign a user a particular role in the authentication server, and then after the authentication event happens, they're given, there's some kind of way of communicating that role, and then the application is responsible for determining what can a partner see, what can a programmer see, and that's something that the application server, the authorization server, sorry, the authentication server doesn't care about, doesn't even need to know about. These are just strings for Fusion Auth.
I like the Silicon Valley references in here. I love that it's Pied Piper with all the characters. That's cool.
Totally, totally. Yeah. So then, do you want to talk about like modeling and how that would look?
Yeah, yeah. Let's do that. We have a few minutes left, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You just feel free to yank me off the stage whenever we gotta go. But
oh no, you're good.
um,
This is so much information, and it's you're explaining it like I'm 5 years old, and I love it. It's great. You're not doing anything that's over the top, so it's really good.
Great. So I think the first thing I would do, let's just create a new application. Let's call it Change Bank. So I think the first thing you need to do is you want to create for your application, you want to think about like what are the big coarse grained things that you want to allow people to do. Um, and if you're building an application that maps the real world, sometimes it's really good to just leverage the kind of roles you would have inside your organization, right? So for a bank, you might have a teller, you might have a manager or branch manager, you might have a financial advisor, and you might have a VP, right? And then you definitely have like a member role too, which is just anyone who's a member. And oh, need to select that. So I think that that's the easy part, right? Is defining the roles. Where it gets complicated and where RBAC is, you know, excuse me, simple in some ways and complicated other ways, is I've just defined these 5 roles for this application. Now I need to go into my web app or my mobile app and make sure that I understand what should a branch manager see, what should a financial advisor see, what should a member see, and this is where you might say, okay, RBAC is great to start off with. Um, Maybe someone's a member at one bank and a branch manager at another bank. Well, how do you kind of map that out in terms of like what specific entities do they have access to? And this is where you start to be like, okay, maybe ABAC makes sense. Maybe I need to have ABAC, or maybe I need to have REBAC. But sorry, I jumped ahead, but I mean, I think it's basically 2 phases to think about authorization. First is defining the high level roles in RBAC, and the second is like going through your application, making sure you understand exactly what each role should have access to. Does
That's
that help? Does that make
there.
sense?
Yeah, no, definitely does. How would you integrate this like on the front end?
Sure. So uh, I think that you want to think about like the front end and the back end both ways, because uh, whatever front end you have, a mobile app or a, browser-based app, um, you want to use RBAC or one of the other authorization models to make a better user experience, but you don't want to rely on it for your security, because you and I both know I can open up Chrome DevTools and tweak the role that is in or the role check that is in the JavaScript, and it'd be harder to do with a mobile app, but you could do it with a mobile app. So you want to use roles and checks for roles inside your UX framework to make things easier for people. You don't want people who can't get access to the branch manager portion of the application to see the link for it, but you don't want to rely on that in the front end. The back end, you want to continually be checking that token, or however else you're conveying the roles, and making sure that even if someone clicked on the link to the branch manager portion of the application, if they don't have that branch manager role, you should throw them out, because either there's a bug or there's a security hole or there's an attacker who's like trying to like poke at your application. Is that what you were thinking about when you're talking about the front end?
Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
definitely.
Great.
Would this integrate with any front end framework or library?
Yeah, so the Fusion aspect or any other kind of authentication server, like its job is done when you have the token, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
So the ID token is something that your JavaScript app can actually read, and so it could look at those. But I'm not aware. I'm probably not in the front end space enough to know whether there are things that can automatically like take the roles that are defined and like modify the UX based on those roles.
Mhm.
I know you could do it like if you hand rolled it, but I don't know enough
Yeah.
to know whether it's automatic.
Gotcha. Cool. No, this is really cool. It seems like a very, very painless setup. Is there anything else in that anybody should be aware of when they're setting up a roles, or is it kind of just right there what you showed?
I mean, I think the thing that you want to think about is we talked a little bit about like how you might have different roles for different kinds of things. And so I think that this is where you want to use RBAC when it makes sense and not use it
Mhm.
when it doesn't make sense. And so smells that I have seen that indicate that RBAC might be kind of growing out of control is when you start to have like what they call role explosion, where you have like roles that map one to one to like APIs or something like that, right? Like
Mhm.
you want the roles to be kind of coarse grained enough. And if you find yourself having hundreds or thousands of roles, that might be an indication that you want to start to look at a different authorization model that might make things simpler for you. Um, because uh, if you have roles that like map that are very, very fine grained, then you're probably building like a logic nightmare inside your application.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think as far as kind of RBAC, like out of the gate, it's define the roles. Um, you want to think about some kind of migration path, right? So like you don't the first set of roles you're probably going to add to or modify, and then you want to think about how to implement it in your application and whether it makes sense to have it be integrated back to the conversation we had earlier, right? If you're a startup trying to find product market fit, you probably want to just integrate it in and like, make sure things are secure, but don't worry as much about like long-term maintainability. Or you want to kind of extract it out when you're like a larger organization thinking about, okay, how do I track that Chris has left the organization? So I want to make sure that I revoke his ability to,
Right.
post to Twitter on our behalf.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. So, Dan, before we wrap up, what are some best practices around auth models and getting started? What should people know?
yeah, so I think a couple of things. First is do the simplest thing that could possibly work. Um, it is something that is kind of rooted in your application. So it is worth spending a little bit of time up front modeling it and like thinking about like, hey, can we get by with our back or do we need something that's more complicated? And then I guess the last best practice would be like be aware of those other deeper authorization models. Don't, I mean, it's kind of like Kubernetes or Kafka, right? Like don't reach for it until you need it, but like be aware of it and be aware of some of the trade-offs. And there's the article I shared with you, but there's a lot of other good stuff out there from a lot of these um, vendors. And there's actually something called AuthZen, which is a new standard from the OpenID Foundation that's trying to codify some of these authorization best practices. So be aware of those things, and as a developer, you have 1,000 things coming at you. I don't think you need to be an expert in all of them. I think the best thing to do is like know they exist and then like know when you need to dig deeper because the problem, is in front of you.
Yeah. No, that's great. Dan, I really appreciate it. Is there anything that you want to plug before we end the stream today?
I appreciate you throwing up that authorization models article. I think that I would just say don't sleep on authorization. Authentication matters a great deal, but authorization, and for all the reasons we've talked about today, does too. And yeah. So thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thank. Well, I appreciate it, Dan. I'm glad like I said, I'm glad we got this squared away. For anybody that's tuned in, if you want to be on the stream, shoot me a DM on LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky. Next week we won't be streaming. We will be at Code Mash. We will have a booth. I'm doing 3 talks. It's going to be a long week, but come see us at Code Mash if you are in the Sandusky, Ohio area, and we'll catch you on the next stream.
I
Thanks,
would
Dan. I
say shout
appreciate
out
it.
to Code Mash. It is an amazing conference. I spoke there
Yeah.
a couple of years ago. It's a great one. So.
Yeah, I'm a Code Mesh vet. I've been going well over a decade now in some capacity as a volunteer, a speaker. I've worked on the speaker selection committee for 3 years, so it's kind of one of those that is near and dear to my heart, and it's only an hour and a half drive. So,
Oh my gosh! And
yeah.
Sandusky, Ohio is I had a surprisingly good time there in January and a couple of years ago. So
I mean, you're in a water park. You got,
awesome. That's awesome. Cool.
So
Well, thanks
cool.
again for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. I'm going to end it. See ya.